Hi, I'm coming back after I finished recording to add some things at the beginning. First, I know that it is going to be a little bit longer of a video than I usually upload, but I did think it was important that we cover this topic in one video or podcast. I didn't want to have to come back to it at a later point because, in my opinion, mental health doesn't always get the attention that it deserves or needs. So, I wanted to spend the time that was needed or appropriate for this subject. It's something that some people still feel uncomfortable talking about. So I wanted to really, talk about some of the more important issues that I found when discussing or, what I see as affecting my mental health. Also, and I will leave this in the description, there are a couple of resources that I did find if you or a loved one may need some assistance or resources for mental health. The Centers for Disease Control, their website regarding mental health tools and resources is cdc.gov /mental health /tools-resources. And then the National Institute of Mental Health, that website is N like Nancy, I, M like Mary, H, N like Nancy, I, H.gov /health /find-help. Some phone numbers or text lines if you do need to speak with someone. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 800-273-TALK. That's 800-273-8255. And then a Veterans Crisis Line is 800-273-8255. And a crisis text line is to text the word hello to 741-741. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to See the Invisible, Living with an Invisible or Rare Disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking some time out to listen today. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. And I know that there's lots of podcasts out there, so I appreciate the opportunity to get to share my experiences with you. And actually today we'll get to talk about one of those experiences that did make me say to myself, I want to start a podcast. Probably if you had told me 2 years ago I would start one, I, would not have believed it. But I know there's lots out there, so thank you for, listening to mine. And before I do start going into any part of the podcast, I do just always want to, say that I am in no way a medical, insurance, or legal expert. So if you do have any questions that fall into any of those areas, please make sure that you're reaching out to someone in that field. So I apologize that it's taken an extra day to get this up for this week. Sometimes things happen. I think they happen for a reason. But on the same day, both the app that we stream our TV through, because we don't have any cable boxes, we just stream through the app on our TVs, because it was like $50 to rent the boxes per month. And then also our internet started slowing down till it eventually stopped working. And so, we schedule a visit, they come out, and, first thing he does is go outside to check, where the cable comes into the house. And he finds that there's been something that happened. And at that point, he doesn't know what, but the actual cable from that box into the house was actually melted. So he said he was actually amazed that we had any internet. How I said it started to slow down, then stop. He's like, I don't know how it lasted at all. And, during the conversation, I mentioned the problem with the TV, and he said, no, that shouldn't impact it. So I actually had two separate problems going on, but they both started at the exact same time, pretty much. If we hadn't called about the one, or if he had gone in maybe a different order, he may not have found that. And I don't know what that would have done to the electric, because I think they were at the same box. And kind of to add to the disclaimers on this, I really am not well versed in electrics or anything like that, or electronics. So from my understanding, I'll say, I think the electric and the cable went into the same box, and we thought about it, and the day before we started having issues, there was a power surge. So that's probably what happened. But that did delay things for a couple of days. It also did make me reflect too, as far as watching TV goes, I really don't watch any scripted shows. I'm not someone who's like, I really need to watch this now. And I've kind of gotten out of that, especially over the last few years. So it wasn't really bothering me that much. I could read, or I had things I could listen to. But, it impacts, not having the internet impacts a number of different aspects of your life. And, my kids needed to go to school virtually. My husband likes to play some games. And, I felt at some points about complaining about that. But then I felt guilty, because I know that there's, people who don't have as quick access to that. Also, the cable company was able to get someone out here within probably about 36 hours or so of the problem starting. So that was amazing too. But still, I guess as time goes by, and we, at least myself, we get used to the quick responses of, the internet, of our apps, our phones. When something comes in that delays it, we can sometimes get a little upset. When I first got out of college, everything was dial-up on computers. And if something loaded in less than 30 seconds, that was, ideal. That was really fast. And now if it takes 3 or 4 seconds, I'm thinking, is there something wrong? So it really made me reflect about even my reliance on, the internet just in general. And since we do stream television, and the kids have the virtual school, then it's something that's really, really important in our lives. And my topic for today was actually, social media and its impact on mental health during the pandemic. Now, overall, I was looking at things to be a little bit more positive in regards to that. But I actually found some interesting things once I started to do research and even reflect a little more myself. So I look back to this time last year, and it was like COVID-19 just hit our worlds at such a quick speed. Myself, it just really seemed like 1 minute, I was actually talking to my doctor. I was at an appointment as things were coming out about COVID-19, and it just seemed like in a minute, just things went out beyond our control. And so even more so for those who have some type of chronic illness or invisible illness, any other underlying medical condition, we already have to take steps each day to make sure that we can still live an active and full life, make sure we follow our medications and treatment plans, get in contact with our doctors when we have to. And with me, I know I still had to take precautions against infection prior to COVID-19. But knowing how severe it was, we then had to, step up our game, maybe is a better way, or is the best way to look at it. We really had to go above and beyond to make sure that we were taking every necessary precaution, not just for ourselves, for our families, and then making sure that if they came in contact with someone that had COVID, that that there were precautions that we even had to take beyond the normal precautions we were taking. So it was just really very quick. And I know in my case too, my husband did come in, I will say maybe a third person contact to someone who had COVID. And, for probably 2 weeks, we split the house up. And we were just in different sections of the house. We didn't come into contact with each other. And this was pretty early on. So we really didn't have any numbers or anything like that to say, okay, well, these are the chances of getting it. It was just really quick. And, we had to learn to adjust and accommodate that, and in my case too, looking forward to having the vaccine. I have a number of different allergies, including some to other vaccines. So my doctor wants me to see an immunologist about whether or not I can even get the vaccine. And that's an appointment I have tomorrow. So, just going from one year to the next, then it was day to day about how are we coping or going to cope. And now we look back and it's been a year. And in some ways, it seems like it was the fastest year I've ever had. And in other ways, it's gone by so slowly. So as a way to cope over this past year, I know a lot of people have really turned to social media. And, I myself am guilty of probably using that a little too much at times. And I've had to recognize that that's not always the best. I did speak with a therapist at the time. My insurance would cover 8 appointments at the time. And, at some point, I was stressed, and I have anxiety anyway, as well as some OCD. So in speaking with her, she actually told me, stay off social media. And, I really felt like that would be more isolating to me if I didn't go on social media. I'm not overall a very overt person. I'm not one who, goes out a lot. I have a very small, close circle of friends. But, to stay off social media, I really felt like I would be missing out on seeing the bigger picture, of corresponding with those that I like to just on an occasional basis to, catch up with. And, I didn't initially want to get off social media, but at one point I did, stop for a little while, and I even signed out. But then I went back in, and I knew that I had to take steps too to, make myself feel better and not be so anxious when I was on social media. Now, kind of the irony to this, if I'm using that word correctly, is when I started my research, I was actually looking at how social media would affect mental health. And I was thinking everything that I read would be positive. Even though not only did I have this experience I'm talking about with my therapist, where she thought I should go off social media, the really driving force to starting a podcast was social media. If you've listened before, then you've probably heard a little bit about it, but I don't comment a lot on social media or websites. But, with all the information about COVID-19 and a lot of people being on completely one side of the line saying, COVID doesn't really exist, or that COVID was, just like a conspiracy theory. But then you had the other side that was really, advocating for how important it was to, practice social distancing, wearing your mask, taking every precaution we could. Now, obviously I think through what I've said just in the past few minutes, I fell onto the side of taking every precaution. But then I also did try to recognize that not everybody's in my exact position. The way that they would look at something would have a whole different point of view. So I tried to respect that in, other comments, realizing some people were scared for their jobs or may have already been laid off. And that's one of the biggest stressors in life. So when, replying to comments, I always tried to be as respectful to others as I could. But this one person came back at me with some really hurtful things, but he did ask a question. When I answered his question, he actually came back with saying he wasn't going to sit there and read everything I wrote. He was just, not going to abide basically by any precautions. and that was his right, and goodbye. And he ended it with, my life was just not worth it. So, that was more than a little hurtful, I'd say. And I got upset, emotional. I cried, and then I just wanted to direct my feelings into something a little more positive. And that's why I started the podcast, because I knew if someone was responding to a comment I made like that, and this is a friend of a friend, even though I did everything I could to try to respect their point of view, I never, questioned the reasons why they felt the way they did. I just kind of, said my side of things, that how important it was, to make sure that my family was practicing every precaution that we could take. I've mentioned before also, I did have a sister who passed away of an autoinflammatory disease, or the complications of. And she was the same age I am now. And I know how that affected her children. And they were much older than mine are now. So, I'm fighting in every way that I can to make sure that I'm going to be here for my children. So again, that's my point of view. I know people have other points of view, and I will always, always try to be respectful of them. But to hear a response saying that my life was not worth it, that was something I would never have expected. Even though, thinking back to some other experiences I probably should have, I'm allergic to dogs, and I mentioned that on one site one time, and someone came back and said that if you have an allergy to dogs, that's God's way of saying that you don't belong on this earth. And so with that, I probably should not have been surprised at any other negative comments, and that one about the allergy to dogs, that was years ago. So probably during this pandemic, it's gotten worse as far as what, some people say. But those are just some of the experiences that I've had. So you would think that while I'm starting research about social media and mental health, I would be thinking that, okay, there are some negative aspects. But it really took me reading some articles to really reinforce that while there is good, there are also bad. And I think for most things in life, we can say that there's nothing that is entirely good or entirely bad. Most things have some flaws somewhere along the way. And I really don't think social media was made for people to feel bad or to make comments that hurt each other. It was probably, in my opinion, created to, keep people connected who lived, a nation or even half a world apart. If you had friends or family that lived in different parts of the world, you could see pictures of family members as they grew up, nephews and nieces that you may not get to see except at holidays. And you get to, experience some of their joys and some of their accomplishments through the means of social media. And, I mentioned a few moments ago that I really don't watch much scripted TV. And some of that even goes back to some reactions, or I guess what you would say controversial or polarizing events, because a lot of scripted TV shows will, take things from real life and bring it into an episode. And I would become so emotionally invested in the characters on the show. And, I would cry when they cried. I would hurt and be angry when they were hurt and angry. And it just really got to a point where I'm like, it's not worth it. I'm too invested in this. I can watch documentaries and continue learning as compared to, ending episodes literally crying. Now, ironically, probably, 15 years ago, I didn't cry that much at anything. I was exactly the complete opposite. But since I had kids, I pretty much cry at the drop of a hat. Maybe not quite that quickly, but pretty close. So we need to do what we need to do when we're using social media, meaning we need to know our limits. We need to make sure that we're, using social media in the way that best allows us to maintain a healthy physical, emotional, and mental balance. Because really, mental health does not get as much attention as it should in many cases. It is considered an invisible illness, and so it should be. It should be, something that we can discuss. Going back to my physical illness, I felt more comfortable explaining that to people after, I went through my own adjustment of, really understanding how it worked, how it affected my body. So, I wanted people to understand why I could not do certain things. And I really wasn't embarrassed to speak about it. And again, I shouldn't be, because it's something I can't control, and I'm doing my very best to live with it. But I really didn't mention my anxiety or anything to a lot of people. Maybe if they opened up to me about some of their struggles, I might, but otherwise, I didn't really open up about it. I did later find out, when I felt I needed to let someone know that I had anxiety, she was like, "Oh, no kidding." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Apparently, there were some people who already realized that, and I just didn't know it. So we really need to open up those conversations about mental health and recognize, as I said in a previous episode, that mental, emotional, and physical health all go together. So we have to make sure that we're keeping up with all aspects of our health. So there were some studies that I found about, mental health and social media and the way people are really looking at it as the pandemic kind of moves forward. For one thing, there is a lot more screen usage. What I did find is there were really three major ways that social media impacted us. And even though some of the articles that I read may have listed more ways, they really, went down to three specific ways and how it affected us negatively. One was the fact that there is more screen usage overall. So the second was, an overload of information. And then the third was misinformation. So starting with the overuse of screen time, or I should say the increase in screen time, I will start out with a positive because, I don't want to make it sound like there aren't that many positives. There definitely are to social media. There is a lot more usage by different people. People who maybe a year and a half ago did not have any smart devices or didn't have a computer or internet, they may have invested in a device because they knew they really needed it to keep in contact with their family, as well as, a lot of doctor's appointments now being done online or through telehealth. That was a convenience for them and even necessary if they were more susceptible or at risk for COVID or even any type of infection. It enabled them to get the help that they needed without putting themselves at more risks. But on the downside, like I said, there are some different aspects. And one that, I felt was that it could take your attention away from those who, really needed it around you, those in real life. I have actually texted my husband in the same house, and not during a time where, we were separate in the house because he had come in contact with someone with COVID. I'm talking about we could both get up and go somewhere or, go to the next room and we're texting. I've actually put something on social media to him too, because sometimes he's so focused on social media, he doesn't pay that much attention to anything else. So I've actually said something and tagged him in it on Facebook to try to get him to really recognize or understand my point of view on something. So, I really find the episodes of where we're texting each other in the same house for no other reason other than it's there, and we're not going to stop doing what we're currently doing. We're just going to text. So, there's a lot of things you can miss out on if you're so focused on the social media. But something that I didn't think about initially in regards to mental health was the effects of blue light. I think probably a lot of us have heard the term, the effects of blue light, or just blue light itself. And what I found is there is, it's called, from a website called Health Hardy, and Hardy was spelled Hearty. And just because I don't think I said this earlier, whatever sources I do use, I will put in the description of the podcast or video, so that if you want to learn more, you can go back and look at those. But natural blue light actually comes from the sun. And in the natural form, it's very beneficial to us. But on the other hand, artificial blue light can actually work against things that are responsible. And I'm going to take a direct quote here from the article. Natural blue light is mostly responsible for regulating our sleep pattern, also known as our circadian rhythm. Additionally, it can have a profound effect on our mood, attention span, and reaction time. So that's what natural blue light does. But to continue a quote, artificial sources of blue light include cell phones, computers, TVs, LED light bulbs, and tablets. Computers, tablets, cell phone, and TVs are wreaking havoc on our health. Undoubtedly, many of us are connected to one of these electronics for hours each day. The blue light effects due to overuse of these electronics can lead to blurry vision, difficulty focusing, headaches, neck and back pain. It can also lead to higher risk in cancer, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and depression. That was really a, no pun intended, eye-opener, because it does affect our sleep as well, where I didn't think that blue light would affect that. I didn't know it could affect my eyes, and I tried to take precautions against that, but did not realize how it could affect or lead to increased chances for cancer or heart disease, and notably, regarding the topic today, depression. Part of this can be due to, having an impact on our sleep. If we're physically tired, we may not be able to react the best way emotionally. That can start to, wreak havoc on our emotional and mental health. So, that's just on a very basic and physical level what spending a lot of time on computers and social media can do. And if you are working from home, odds are you are working from a computer for a good part of the day. And so you're already, in contact with a lot of blue light from the work. And then, I know as well, if you're working from home, you have a much smaller or, shorter commute. I would drive about 45 minutes each way. So that's an hour and a half that some people are getting back, depending on your commute length, where, okay, you didn't have to drive that distance if you are working from home during the pandemic. So you're spending more time doing other things, and some of that time may be spent on social media. And also during lunch as well. I know sometimes I would go to a different part of the building or walk around for lunch. A lot of times I ate at my desk, but I wasn't on my phone, where, again, if you're at home, you might just grab something from the fridge, sit down, and start, looking at things on social media. So those are just some ways that the increased screen time can affect us. The second overall common thread that I found was stress due to an overload of information about the pandemic. That really was spread through, I think, every article that I reviewed. When we're, turning on the news each day, and let's face it, a lot of the news is already really, really negative to begin with. There were things that before COVID I hated to read, just because it felt like every time I opened, a web browser, there was more bad news. And actually, just while I'm saying this, there was an old Anne Murray song called "I Sure Could Use a Little Good News Today." And this is probably 3 decades or more old. And even then, the song talked about how, opening a newspaper, she would read stories about robbery and natural disasters. And, she could just use some good news. Going on decades later, I guess it's something we still all face, that whenever we open now our computer, our phone, as compared to a newspaper from then, we are encountered just by bad news and more bad news. Now, adding on top of that, COVID, which means, initially we were looking at people losing their jobs, small businesses especially going out of business, concern about food security, and then, seeing the number of deaths that were reported each day and how those numbers went up and how many people ultimately died or were forever impacted by this illness. We were seeing that in everything that we opened. So, whether or not you had previously been treated for mental health reasons, you were now being faced with just, bit after bit of sad news that could make us angry. And, going back to 2020, it was more than just, the pandemic. There is now currently a time of social need, and changes that are going on that need to be made. And, those being addressed, they're very important and they need to be addressed. And they've been pushed away for way too long. We are responsible now for seeing, injustices and trying to make sure that they don't happen again. So we were faced with really a lot of introspection over this past year. Then having an election that was really fraught with bitterness, that added to it as well. So, it's just been a very rough year. So seeing the numbers of people who have lost their jobs, seeing the number of people who have died, and in most cases, I think most everybody, I know I can never say everybody, but I think most people have at least known someone who's passed away from COVID, whether it's an acquaintance or, someone who's really, really close to you. I've lost 3 people that I know. My sister worked with 6 people who passed away from it. And, for us to see that every day, on the personal level, we are, confronted with the fact that many of us know someone who's passed away. And then seeing it repeated day after day in the news, this is the death toll. It's almost like we're reliving it again. At least in the way that I feel, it just keeps bringing it up, that when it's already difficult enough as it is, we are constantly seeing the numbers go up. To a degree, I think it is necessary. We need to know what's going on. We need to look at information and be able to, make adjustments to our plans accordingly, to know what, potential dangers are. So we, I think, to be socially responsible, do need to look at the news. We need to, understand what's going on in the world. But I did read something, though, that a very high percentage of people, and I'm just trying to find the number here. Here it is. Nearly 1 in 6 Americans use YouTube as their primary platform about news regarding COVID-19. And Facebook is the #1 social media platform regarding it. So, 1 in 6 people are looking at YouTube, and I know I'm on YouTube right now. But when you're looking for information from, a place where possibly, someone may, even unintentionally be spreading misinformation, that adds to the overall impact of social media as well. Plus, I find it's very convenient. I watch a lot of documentaries on YouTube, and it shows as some of my recommendations to watch some of these news shows. So I think it's our responsibility to keep up with the information that we need, but also be able to know when it's time to step back and say, okay, I have the information that I needed. I will now go, spend some time with the family, if you're, able to. And then I kind of touched base on this now was misinformation and the impacts that the misinformation can have on mental health. Other than being confusing, it can be very frustrating. If you're getting information that is, incorrect, but it's information that is very, very negative, then that increase your anxiety. If you find out that that information was wrong, then you now have a distrust of, different websites, different news sources. Maybe it's good to have a healthy skepticism about everything you read or see, but I know if I read something and I find it to be very important, but then later find out that it was not accurate, for me, that makes me very angry. And not only for myself, but anybody else who may have read that and, thought those things. It really leads to a level of mistrust that we really can't afford at this time. Right now, we all need to really, lean on each other for support. Now, along with the whole misinformation aspect, I can't really say trolls per se, but I guess maybe that's the only word used to describe that I can use to describe them, are trolls on the internet. But think about it. If you're just typing something on Twitter or on Facebook or anywhere, even if it's a comment on a news article, I've kind of wrapped that into social media as, a lot of people do make comments, even though some places have turned them off just because of the way people are commenting on those threads or posts. But, looking at the way some people talk to each other in the comments, if you met them in real life, you wonder how they would react. One of the articles that I read gave an example of, let's just say you're always talking bad about a celebrity. You comment how much you don't like them. This is why you don't like them, things like that. But by chance, you happen to meet that person. A lot of people will then become their fan. They're standing in front of them and asking for an autograph, where, an hour ago they were on social media saying how much they hated the latest movie and things like that. To put that in perspective, then it's, then putting a comment on something, knowing it's going to hurt an individual, whether or not you can see that individual, those words do have meaning. I know that some people might think, well, they're just words, how much can they really hurt? They can, especially at a time where we are reliant on more electronic communications and not so much, being face-to-face in some things. So yes, words can hurt. And, having the situation we've had this past year where most of our communication is coming through a computer or smart device, that can really have an impact in how we feel about each other. So looking at some of the ways that we can try to get past the negative aspects of social media, because I still feel that social media can be very impactful in a positive way. But in order to make sure that social media is being used to the best of its ability we have to find ways to either get rid of or mitigate the negative aspects so that we can get past them and focus more on the positive. So these are just some suggestions compiled from a few different sources. And yes, some of the sources that I used today were in regards to those who have chronic illness. I learned a new word. It was called painsomnia. And I'm like, yes, there are nights that I can't sleep because I'm in pain. And if I start to roll over, that just increases my pain and things like that. So I learned a new word in that. So I think it was really good to be able to find something that was specifically talking about those with chronic illnesses. So just some ideas. Make sure that you're being responsible. And I kind of mentioned this in some ways earlier. Be responsible for you. Make sure that you're only using it for what you need to use it for. I know that in general, my friends and how they use it range from all I see are pictures of cute little puppies and kittens to using it as a political platform. So I have that whole range, and I think most people do. So, go on, find out what you need to, communicate with those who you really want to, and then take a step back. So it's not picking up the phone and spending 3 hours on your phone or tablet, whatever device you're using, and you're spending that time away from your family while at the same time becoming more and more frustrated by what you're seeing. And also prioritizing sleep. This is where I learned the word painsomnia. And this was from an article from a website called Creaky Joints. So I can definitely understand that. Sleep is important because just as our body needs to rest, our brain needs to rest. It just kind of lets us relax. It clears out our thoughts. And if you don't get enough sleep, then both your body and your mind are affected. So, make sure that you're taking care of that. And also, for so many years, most of us had certain routines, and those routines have been disrupted by COVID-19. Don't add something more to it by, not prioritizing the amount of sleep that you get. I know that one particular aspect that the article from Creaky Joints emphasized was also that, part of the pandemic went through our holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and, we did not, in most cases, get to spend those holidays with our families and loved ones. But in some ways, and I can definitely understand this, that some people with chronic illness actually found that it was beneficial, at least for this year. It made it easier to be able to get a little bit more rest during the holidays. I know that myself, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. Just all these commitments you have to make. But, sometimes with chronic illness, there's so many things that may come up during a gathering or during the holiday season that it's really hard to juggle everything. And, sometimes we would need to make it, an excuse to not be able to attend something, whether it's just being physically tired because of your illness or knowing that, going to a gathering might trigger something. I know that with an autoinflammatory disease, there are foods that can actually lead to more inflammation. So you're trying to stay away from them. You go to a holiday party and they're there. So there's a lot going on with that. So I just found that kind of interesting in the Creaky Joints article that went along with the painsomnia I read about. But also, one of the things to try to help us with getting through the pandemic on social media is don't expect others to read our minds. Whether you're communicating with someone directly or you're communicating with your family, make sure that you set expectations of what you need, especially, with the chronic illness. And this goes for, I think, everyday life, not just, until the end of COVID-19. There are people who want to help us and be there for us, but they don't necessarily know what we need. So, make sure you're very clear. Also, I know that we have to isolate to a certain degree, but don't isolate completely. Don't take it to the other direction where you're having no contact with anyone. Try to keep some type of, communication open with people, even if you're not able to see them in person. Something I added in is with everything, have moderation. So don't go from one extreme to another. Try, if you can, to schedule some type of social time. And I admit I'm guilty of this for a lot of the quarantine, the isolation. Each person in my family and the house has kind of commandeered their own little section. And, we come together for dinner and we sit at the table, and it does feel like everybody's just ready to say, okay, can we go now? Because they want to go take care of something else. And, I admit I'm there too. Usually mine, I'm looking at it like I need to, do the dishes. I need to put this away. Everybody is looking at a way to get away from each other. And I think that's because we've almost, come to a point where we haven't socialized with other people for so long. We're starting to isolate even from ourselves. Let's see. Now, some of these things I've already gone through, about, for one thing, understanding that even without COVID-19, that those with chronic illness, invisible illness, we already have things that we have to go through every day. So that COVID has added another layer. Also, make sure if you do have any type of gathering, or if you are, in a social situation, try to bring up the courage to actually address it if some people aren't social distancing or wearing a mask. I've run into those occasions, and I felt kind of awkward about addressing it with someone who worked at the store. But, people were basically flaunting the rules and had their masks down, and, the masks weren't really doing anything if they weren't wearing them. So, make sure that your voice is heard regarding those types of things. Set maybe a time limit, or, a certain number of articles that you might read per day through social media. If you need to go online for things such as work or, other types of research, go ahead and use it for that. But then any other time that you're spending online other than what's necessary, try to limit that time so that you're not, being inundated or flooded with, all these pieces of information. And I know, too, that might require some willpower. Again, kind of going back to our family here, we have been quasi-isolated for over a year now. And I think we've all just kind of come into little habits. And, we just need to get back on track and, be able to say, I'm stepping away, so that we can spend more family time together. Something that I find is important is getting involved in support groups online. I know that if there weren't support groups on Facebook, I would have nobody really to talk to about my illness. To my knowledge, I think there might be one other person in my state who has it. I'm not entirely sure. I know that for my main core group of doctors, most of them have said they've never had a patient with my illness before. So without social media support groups, I really wouldn't have anyone to reach out to say, hey, is this normal? Especially at the very beginning. Or, I'm really feeling frustrated because this happened today. They know how I'm feeling. So, if you need to, make sure that you're going to support groups that, are there to show understanding, to show that there is someone out there who, even though may not be in the exact same situation, can both lend an ear and then, show some understanding and empathy to what you're going through, because, they've probably been through something similar. something too, again, I can relate definitely, is we can use other forms of communication other than text or social media. And probably most of my communication with most family members, since this has all started, has been text or Facebook Messenger or things like that. I probably can't remember the last time I picked up a phone to call someone other than out of necessity. Even when it comes down to customer service for certain things, I will use the chat feature. If there's an email feature, because they don't have chat, I will use that. I just prefer not to make phone calls unless we get to a point where it's absolutely necessary. Before the pandemic, my family did the same thing, I feel. We did a lot of group text, a lot of sharing on Facebook Messenger. But the difference was we still had gatherings where we came together and talked and saw each other face to face. So now pretty much our communications have been limited to a lot of, messages, whatever form they may take, but not actual communication where we can hear their voices or see them. And all throughout this, I would say at times, we really need to do a group chat or something like that with a video. And I think only one time have I actually done that with one of my siblings. Something I have done, though, is turned off a lot of the settings, notification settings on my phone. Before, I used to be notified every time I got an email, every time there was an update to Facebook, every time anything happened, pretty much. I got a notification, and so it was really, really annoying, to say the least. And without it really being about stepping away from social media, I just knew that I was getting overwhelmed with just being notified about every little thing. So I went in, found the things that I really thought were important and kept them on, and turned everything off so that I check my email once or twice a day. I've sometimes gone a couple days without checking it, which is a little difficult, but usually after I get past the first day, it's fine. I don't even think about it until, maybe near the end of the day. And I say, okay, well, just let me make sure I haven't missed anything really important. So I find that when I do things like that, either sign out of an app too, because I've done that a couple times. Once you get used to it, you don't really think about it as much, and you don't get as distracted about things that are beyond your control. So that was, really everything that I wanted to go over today, or really I should say could go over today. Again, I really do want to look at the positives of social media, but again, I know that if we don't get past the negative aspects, we can't really enjoy the positive parts. So if we just keep focusing each time we go online and open up a tab or open up a window, and we see these news stories that, are very, very difficult to hear or read about, we have to have some way that we can mitigate that, where we can lessen its impact on us emotionally and mentally, because, again, all of that will affect us then physically. So make sure that we're being responsible in our social media use, be respectful in comments, because, again, not everybody's situation is exactly the same. And the way a person responds to or communicates really is, based on what they're feeling and what they're going through or have been through. So, we really have to recognize that too. And even if someone is being more negative, as long as they're not being belligerent, I do also look at it as an instance where we can try to educate someone about, how it feels to be on the other side of things. I know that not everybody would be receptive to that. I can even say on a couple different pieces of, comments that I've seen that, they were not going to be receptive to anything that anyone had to say because their minds were made up. But I really think being respectful helps as far as being able to communicate with others. If we show respect and let someone else know that we're thinking about and looking at their side of things, I think they will be much more open about hearing our side of things. So be responsible in social media. I've said before about other things, know where to fight your battles. Even today, I haven't made a comment online about any post other than maybe a picture of my niece or something like that. But I found myself wanting to comment twice today, and one was really it was information. It was fact-based. Someone just had a question about an article, and I had seen the information in another article about the same thing. So it was just an answer. There really is nothing to be controversial about that. The next one was, something that could be considered a controversial answer. But again, I said it with as much respect as I could. And then I went to leave a third comment on something else. And that's when I stepped back. I'm like, it was like 1 o'clock, and I usually don't, make that many comments. I'm like, you know what? It's like, it's funny that this is happening today, but I'm like, I'm not going to spend, another minute typing up this comment. What I do find, though, is that sometimes if I start to write something out or, talk about it, it helps me. So sometimes if I read an article about something that's negative, I will go in and just start typing on whatever I have up, Google Docs, WordPad, just to kind of get it out of my system. And I sometimes wonder if that's what comments do, if people type them without always taking a step back and reading them to see how it might impact someone else, or to look back and say, why am I reacting this way to something? I find that if I take a step back once I've typed it out, I've gotten all my feelings out, I have a better idea of why I felt that way, and I can just delete that, wipe it out. And, it really helps me as far as getting out my feelings. But at the same time, if I'm not comfortable commenting, I don't have to comment. So I will try to cut this ending short. I'm very, very sorry. This took much longer than I thought, but I think it was either the last podcast or the one prior to that. I mentioned that I really thought the mental health aspect was something that was very important, and I wanted to give it the attention it deserved. So, I didn't want to cut off in the middle of the recording and say that we were going to come back on another day. So thank you for hanging in there. I really appreciate, again, everyone who's listening, taking the time to listen and let me share my feelings, my experiences. Just to share something too, we recently hit over 300 downloads for the podcast, which I can't see specifics on things, but I've even had a couple from Austria, some other countries in Europe, that it's really amazing. So, I just hope again that everybody can get something positive out of the podcast or video, depending on how you're listening. And if you have a chance, go back in and either like the video or not if you didn't, or share the episode, make a comment. I'm not sure exactly how all the algorithms work, but that makes, I know if you have more shares or more likes, more comments, things like that, will make it easier for people to find when they're searching for it. So, if you enjoy, the podcast, or you're getting something out of it and you think someone else would like to listen, just please feel free to share. And thank you again for hanging with me throughout this whole podcast. All right, you have a good day, and I hope to see you next week.